We're doing Article 4. That's the relationship of the states to each other to the extent that the federal government has a say in that. And there's 4 sections. The main thing I want you to get out of these right now is so that you know where to find this information. That's one of the most important things about studying the Constitution. If you just try each time to read from the very beginning to find one piece of information, you may find it tedious. If you know what you're looking for and know where you're going to find it, it's a whole lot easier. There are some terms that are used as shortcuts to those describing those things. The first discussion is, or the first shortcut is full faith and credit. And that means that a document or a court proceeding, records, official records, birth records, whatever, marriage records, death records, all these things are equal in all the states in the sense that they should be as good in one state as another, so that if you're trying to prove when you were born, but you've just moved from California to Massachusetts, you can show them your birth certificate or whatever, and Mass gets to accept it. So it applies full faith and credit to the acts, the records, and the judicial proceedings. In other words, the judgments, the opinions offered about the judges, or the convictions made by juries or whatever. Things that are common, whether or not they're correct or whether or not they're constitutional, might include marriage licenses, license to haul or drive, and birth records and so on, as we mentioned a minute ago. So all of that is in Section 1 of Article 4. Article 2, or excuse me, Section 2 of Article 4 is the privileges and immunities, extradition of charged or convicted fugitives, criminals, whatever. Extradition. The word extra means like beyond normal or outside the bounds or something. You know, like extra good is way beyond good. So the extradition of people can be requested by the governor of one state of the governor of another, and they would have to hand over the person if they're under indictment or whatever in the state to which they're to go. I just see, I forgot this simple thing about Roman numerals. If I set my book down, maybe I can do it better. Roman numerals, okay, really obvious. What is this Roman numeral? 1. Okay, and then if there's 2 next to each other, 3. Okay, and then when you get to the 4th one, well, wait a minute, let me jump a minute to 5. The V is 5, and I think this goes back to hand counting. And you get your 1, 2, 3, and then when they wanted 5, they used the V that your thumb forms. But to subtract a number, some older forms still use the 4 single digits, but the otherwise the common thing is you subtract the 1 that's to that way, just like we have the negative numbers on that side of the decimal. They have the subtract 1 or whatever from the big number, the 5 or the 10. And if you take your 2 hands and go like this, you get the X that forms the 10. And we won't bother with the others right now because we don't need them for reading the Constitution. Okay, now back to this stuff. So you have full faith and credit regarding the acts, the records, and the judicial proceedings, and it applies to you with everything from concealed carry or whatever, and you may run into some conflict on some of those. Then privileges and immunities could be many things, but the one they single out in the Constitution is the one that is commonly known as extradition, although they describe it as if somebody in this circumstance has escaped to another state, they shall be returned upon request of the governor, that kind of thing. Part 3 deals with the admission of new states. That occurred during my lifetime, but not most of yours. In 1958 and 59, we gained first Alaska, and then what's the last state? Hawaii. Okay. So when I was in high school, those two joined, and the flag changed twice in rapid succession. And if you have a 49-star flag, you probably have a bit of a rarity. New states admitted by Congress. So that's another of the duties of Congress. And occasionally we say, all the things that Congress can do are listed in Article 1, Section 8. And that is basically true, but there are these little add-ons throughout. An example yesterday, when Mr. Affleck did the executive and judicial branches, toward the end of the judicial branch, he mentioned that the court has appellate jurisdiction with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. So what does that tell you that Congress is doing when they say, oh, we tried to get rid of abortion, but we can't? Tells you they're a cop-out, doesn't it? They're making excuses. They could have simply said, Supreme Court, you don't have anything to do with the state laws on domestic matters, family matters, marriage. There's another one. But marriage, childbirth, adoption, all those very personal, very family things. If the state has a law, that's one thing, but the 9 old men and women should not be dictating, or 5 most of the time, should not be dictating what the whole country does. It's not their business to make law. And Mr. Affleck stressed that point to you, but I just want to reinforce it here. Part 4, the United States is to guarantee to every state a Republican form of government. And that, of course, does not refer to these perverse national parties we have today. It refers to the idea that all the founders knew that there are some things, some really basic principles that are not to be violated by the government. And those things, the res publica is the R-E-S, and then a word that looks like public with an A on the end. Those things, they're the public thing, like a public trust. Those things are not to be messed with. Now that's a lesson that clearly the current crop have missed. So we have our hands full, and that's why we're running Camp Constitution, is because we've got to roll back some of these mistakes, these criminal trespasses, these idiocies, whatever. We've got to go back to having some things that are, in effect, sacred. Can't be changed even by majority vote. Article 6, and I'm jumping over 5 on purpose because Mr. Shurtleff is going to handle that, and he sees in that a clear and present danger. So you'll want to pay close attention to the time that he has. These are not divided into sections. These, you'll notice, it's Article 4, Section 1, full faith and credit. 2, privileges and immunities, including especially extradition. 3, making new states, whether combining others or whatever, and how that's done with Congress's approval and the approval of any affected state legislature. So if, for example, and nobody's contemplating this, but if, for example, Michigan were to give up its Upper Peninsula and hand it over to Wisconsin because somebody broke the bridge and they didn't know how to fix it, then that would require the legislatures of both Wisconsin and Michigan to accomplish. Anyway, Article 6 now. Article 6 is the really important one as far as establishing the authority of the Constitution. The fact that all the authority of the United States rests under the Constitution. The Constitution is the fundamental law that limits, or should limit, if they paid attention to it, our government, so that it doesn't turn into Dictator K over here, or anybody else. Okay, so Article 6, the first part of it, though not a section, it's just one unit. The United States is responsible for all debts, even from before the Constitution was made. And so all debts from before or which shall be made under the authority of the United States. And of course, you're holding the authority of the United States in your hands, probably in more ways than one. So this Constitution, the laws made in effect under it, says in pursuance thereof or some such, and treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States. So everything, all federal power goes back to this Constitution. All lawful federal power. And then there's another important part that the senators, the representatives, the state legislators, and all executive and judicial officers shall by oath or affirmation support this Constitution. So a lot of times these people forget, ignore, or whatever, their oath of office. Oh yeah, I'll uphold this thing. What's it say anyway? Oh, never mind. That seems to be the current attitude. And it's the attitude you'll find when you start going to political party meetings, if you choose that route to correct things. You'll go to a Republican convention and they'll talk about our democracy. Didn't they ever read anything the Founding Fathers said about the nasty and brutish things that result from pure democracy? Of course, at the time they wrote our Constitution, there was something brewing in France that gave them all a hard lesson in that. It was, in effect, the first communist revolution, where they tried to overthrow all religion and all basic knowledge, change everything. There were a couple modernizations that people may approve of, but we had already done it with coining our money. We'd gone to a decimal system. And they made it mandatory. But of course, one of the reasons, I'm sure, for Brexit is that you all know what Brexit is. It's in the news recently about the British exiting. That's where they get the name Brexit, BR for Brit, and exit, where they decided to quit the European Union. One of the things that the European Union had forced upon them was arresting grocers who insisted on selling bananas by the pound, because pound is not the decimal system. Anyway, that was just an aside, but sometimes makes things more interesting. One last thing that's important. We've had one candidate declare that he wouldn't even admit people of a certain religious faith, but in our Constitution, as far as holding office, now it doesn't say anything about immigration in this, but it does say that no religious test shall ever be required to hold an office or any public trust under our government. That leaves us with just the one last Article 7, and you can read it through. It's simple and interesting, and it tells you basically that the Constitution was approved and ratified by the required 9 states. So that's what they had set it up as a requirement. And that passed on September 17th. Wait a minute, no, they offered the Constitution, finished the Constitution September 17th of, they finished the Constitution in 1787. It was ratified 1788. And so the first officials under the United States took office in 1789, which was coincidentally the opening of the revolution in France that was so horrible by comparison. So I will turn this over to Mr. Shurtleff to tell you about the clear and present danger of
Thank you.
Article 5. Thank you.